Welcome to The Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network. My name is Jamera Burley, and I'm joined with my brilliant co-host, Bria Baker. And today we are going to be talking about a topic that is impacting the reality of millions of Americans, mass incarceration.
Yeah, we're talking about cages, control, and capitalism, the three C's. Because despite declining crime rates, America is still the most incarcerated country in the world. And that's not by accident, it's by design, and only getting worse as the Trump administration doubles down on criminalization.
Absolutely. This episode will explore how the criminal legal system is built not just for punishment, but for profit, and how it continues to devastate Black, brown, and low-income communities across the United States.
Yeah. And this is so real for us. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I wanted to also jump into the topic immediately as someone who's been working on this for a while, but we got to get the headlines because
let's get into headlines because we'll get carried away and dive all the way in.
I know one person who should be locked up right now, but that would be punishment.
Honestly, a lot of my headlines are connected to this topic. The first one is that for-profit immigration detention is expanding as Trump accelerates his deportation plans. A lot of people are making money off of the downfall and pain and trauma of families who are being separated at borders, of students and professors who are being snatched from their universities, and those stock prices are going up.
Yeah,
I think that's really telling.
Yeah, it's so true. Directly related to my topic in Teen Vogue, which is that families are being separated. But to your point, they're being sent to private detention facilities that are run by the one percenters, right? And so your article, I think, really examines the fact that there is so much money to be made in doing bad to our society. Yeah. So much money to be made in doing harm to individual communities by separating them. And Donald Trump and his administration is quite literally the most hilarious people ever, because it's filled with a whole bunch of people who are here through immigration, but yet they hate immigration to the extent that they want to lock people up.
Unless you want to buy that $5 million gold card, of course, because that's totally different. Or unless they're going to take advantage of you in their various factories like Elon Musk wants to do. But yeah, I think it's very, very unserious, but also deeply serious that at a time when the economy is tanking, when tariffs are affecting us deeply and shaping international relations, his folks are getting rich off of locking people up. They're not raiding people's, they're not arresting people who are engaging in criminal behavior or who are threats to. Right. They're going to workplaces. They're talking to IRS. They're like, let's get the tax paying people out of here and make money off of their demises, which is really, really sad.
Yeah. And Oh, I was just going to say, and I think one thing that people always try, like one of the biggest misconceptions about progressives, which I like to consider myself to be, is that like, because we fight for justice, therefore we do not believe in holding people accountable for the crimes they commit. Right. But many legal experts and scholars, including many of folks around the country, do not believe that immigration should be a crime of criminality, but a crime of, at the very least, civil, right? But even then, these folks should not be locked up in cages, should not be separated from their children, especially in a country that is literally built on immigration and built on taking of land and taking of resources from those who are native to this country. And I can tell you that white people are not native to this country, but yet they want to make all the rules on immigration.
And they want to build all the walls.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what's I think what's interesting about the Teen Vogue article, even though it's very similar to yours, is that it's coming from Teen Vogue, right? Teen Vogue, traditionally a fashion magazine, I think is becoming, over the last probably 5 to 7 years, have dibbled and dabbled in the progressive spaces and talked about very political charged topics. And I think considering, the Black Star Network is an example of amongst examples of people who are talking about real issues by real people. But I think Teen Vogue is also in that same grain of not being afraid to talk about very controversial issues led by young people, right, who are having discussions in a really unique way. So in that regards, I thought it was really even more interesting that it's coming from a traditionally seen as a fashion magazine.
1,000,000%. And that the article ends with call to actions. What can we do about it? Right. Which is very different from just reporting the news and saying stock prices are going up. It's like, OK, that's alarming. But like, what are you encouraging us to do anything about it? And I really appreciate Teen Vogue stepping out of that space of neutrality and saying there is no sidelines here. We should all be concerned that the wealthiest people in our nation are getting wealthier by deporting and detaining and putting people in these insanely horrible conditions, and doing so through very sneaky means. That brings me to my second article, which is that a student at Columbia was steps away from his final citizenship interview, or so he thought. He was told to come in for a interview. And so that means he's been going through the process. He's been doing everything right, filling out the paperwork, paying the fees, talking to lawyers. He gets brought in for a citizenship interview, and it was a ruse to actually arrest and detain and deport him to the West Bank and Gaza. And like, that is just so alarming to me, that you say that you want people to do things right, but it's a trap. You're laying traps for people that now I can't even show up to my citizenship interviews. I can't speak to my lawyer without wondering, is this actually being set up to capture me? So you don't want people to go through the right ways, but then when they don't do it by the letter of the law, then they're overstaying their visas and they are trying to take, taxpayer resources and all of these things. I think that is one of the most alarming stories of an immigration detention case. And again, this is a Columbia student. So, I mean, not that we should be prioritizing who immigrates here based on what they can bring to the country, but this is someone who is obviously incredibly brilliant, who would bring so much, and is being weaseled out of what is a right, because migration is a right, especially if you are going about it through all of the right channels. And so that is just such a devastating story.
Absolutely. And I think it's cruel and unusual, right? Like, we know what is currently happening on the West Bank and Gaza. We know what is currently happening because the United States, is supplying the military weaponry that is enabling for bombs to be dropped on hospitals, schools, and children. Yeah. Right. Innocent civilians. We know what is happening. So the idea that the government, it creates a ruse to target, because this is a targeted attack, right? Many people suspect that Columbia University actually offered up the student's name because he was one of the organizers in one of the protests to a Free Palestine protest. And again, Free Palestine does not mean hate to Jews. It means literally Free Palestine. Similar to Black Lives Matter did not mean we didn't think anybody else's life matters. It means that we're talking about a particular group of people who is experiencing abnormal amount of violence that is oftentimes state sanctioned or state sponsored violence. That being said, many people suspect that his name was given to ICE by the university, and this man was picked up after spending 10 years in the United States. His only crime, that being speaking out against the U.S. Involvement in a genocide. And that is not a definition that I've developed on my own. That is a definition that has been decided on by the International Court and by international agencies that are entrusted to regulate international law.
Preach. Preach. And so,
opinions only. And what is the law? What is factual? What is factual thing? And I think anyone, say you're an individual watching this and you are like, well, I don't agree with his actions, or I don't agree with his political views. Sure. But it is a very dangerous path that we are on when a president can decide who is allowed to stay in this country solely on the basis of their political views. That is dangerous.
Because we know where this president's political views are. So right now you might be saying, well, I don't know where I stand on Palestine and Israel, so I'm not speaking up about those who are being deported and detained and fired for their opinions there. But this is also an administration that doesn't want us talking about Black folks. Anything with the label DEI, woke, anti-racism, critical race theory is also on his shit list. And so it's only a matter of time before Black scholars and queer scholars and anyone doing any sort of progressive justice work are also being targeted. And so they're starting with people who have visas. Then they're going after people who have green cards. It's only a matter of time before they find a way to go after US citizens. And again, there's that poem about, they came for them, but I didn't say anything because and by the time it's going to come for the US citizens, it'll be too late. It will have already snowballed into a place where we have no idea how to rein in and provide any sort of checks and balances for this administration. So we should all be concerned that the party of so-called free speech is really doubling down and removing funding and sending people to concentration camps and prisons for their free speech.
Yeah. And also just remember that recently Donald Trump was caught on the hot mic with the president or dictator of El Salvador saying that he needed to build 5 additional facilities because Donald Trump plans to send homegrowns next. Homegrowns are U.S. citizens. In case you're wondering, homegrowns are U.S. citizens. The president of the United States is saying that he intends to send U.S. citizens to El Salvador prisons if he believes that they are criminals. The criminal of all criminals is deciding on
right. Like, and that goes to it. Like, no, progressives are all about accountability. This party doesn't want to hold themselves accountable. They want to be able to get rid of anyone who is a dissident, anyone who is a protester, anyone who is anti their regime. And for all of the values that we say America sits on, it means nothing if we can't defend our ability to critique our own government and say, hey, I don't agree with what you're doing without fearing for our lives. I mean, as we know, like Mahmoud Khalil, who is also a Columbia student, he was snatched up and his wife is about to go into labor and he won't be able to be a part of her support system, be present for the birth of his child. And so now what that signals is for anyone else is saying, I got to lay low. I can't afford to be taken from my family. I can't afford to lose my job. I can't afford to. And so it's going to force people to comply in advance, which we've talked about on previous episodes, is that we don't want people to do that. But the real fear is, am I willing to risk my freedom? And I know that people are having their freedom taken from them. And I know that people are having their livelihoods taken from them. And that is what the threat of incarceration can do in a country that incarcerates more than any country in the world. So I know we're going to get into all of that soon. Let's take a break, though. Let's take a breather. You are watching The Other Side of Change only on the Black Star Network, and we will be right back.
We begin tonight with the people who are really running the country right now.
Now, Trump is often wrong and misleading about a lot of things, but especially about history.
Donald Trump falling in line with President Elon Musk.
In the wake of the unsettling news that MSNBC has canceled Joy Ann Reid's primetime show, The Readout, Roland Martin and the Black Star Network would like to extend an invitation to all of the fans of Joy Ann Reid's MSNBC show to join us every night to watch Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming on the Black Star Network for news, discussion of the issues that matter to you, and the latest updates on the twice impeached, criminally convicted felon-in-chief Donald Trump and his unprecedented assault on democracy, as well as co-president Elon Musk's takeover of the federal government. The Black Star Network stands with Joy Ann Reid and all folks who understand the power of Black voices in media. We must come together and never forget that information is power. Be sure to watch Roland Martin Unfiltered weeknights, 6 p.m. Eastern at youtube.com/Roland S. Martin or download the Black Star Network app.
You are now watching The Other Side of Change only on the Black Star Network. Before the break, we hit you with the latest headlines of the day and how they're impacting or correlating to the topic at hand, which is mass incarceration. You know, Bria, before the break, mentioned that the U.S. has the largest prison population in the world, but I think we need to put that into context. The U.S. is responsible for 5% of the world's population, but we account for more than 25% of its prisoners. Why is that? Are Americans more inherently violent, or are the systems that govern American more violent?
1,000,000%. And there we go with my percentages. But no, I think also on that point is that so many other jail and prison systems around the world are not for-profit systems. And so not only are they not incarcerating as many people, but the goal is actually rehabilitation, not making money for shareholders, not recidivism because that keeps beds full and that's good for, again, shareholders, but actually making sure that when people are getting out, they are able to return to society. And that's just clearly not a priority for this country. I mean, so many people are languishing and dying behind their cells, and that serves shareholder desires. So it's really this vicious cycle that only benefits that 1% and those invested in those industries.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one thing that many people do not know is that many of these for-profit entities, whether it be detention centers or official prisons and jails, have contracts with local governments that basically says that they need to fill the city, the state needs to fill a certain amount of beds. Otherwise, they renege on their contract. You know how dangerous that is? That now incentivizes police, cities, and states to fill beds versus actually to solve crime.
Oh, yeah. And that we see that playing out in things like stop and frisk and similar policies where there are now quotas around, even if there is not crime, you have to hit a certain amount of numbers by the end of your shift for it to be considered success. And for me, it's like, well, isn't the goal for police to get to a place where they do not have to arrest so much because we are preventing the harm to happen? But no matter whether the crime rates are down, the quotas remain the same. They actually are going up with time. And so that's when you have moments where, okay, typical incarceration is not sexy, but immigration detention is. To bring up a pop culture example, Orange is the New Black. I mean, the show has been out for forever. So if this is a spoiler for you, that you took too long to watch it. But they kind of showed this in the last season where, the movement against mass incarceration and the Black Lives Matter movement is really pushing the closure of jails and prisons. And so you have these nonviolent offenders and women who have served the majority of their sentences who are being released from the prisons and rearrested in the parking lots. And this is really something that happens by ICE. And sent to immigration detention centers because that is the new area without oversight, the new area that you can do things on. So I'm just really glad that we're digging into this even before we bring on our guests.
Yeah, and let's be honest, the system targets those who are the most vulnerable within our societies, oftentimes who lack the least amount of agency. And I'll be very transparent. I come from a family where I have multiple family members who have been incarcerated, and none of those incarcerations of my family members or those within my community made my community more safe, because the idea that arresting people, taking them off the street automatically creates safer environments, it's actually false. The presence of police oftentimes make our communities more dangerous. And so I think we as a community, in a collaboration with our elected officials, need to have a much larger conversation of how we define public safety and making sure that, arresting people on suspicion of violence isn't the same thing as creating a just and safe environment for everyone to be able to live and thrive, especially with these now ICE raids that can go into churches and schools and grocery stores and people's homes. That doesn't make us feel safe. If anything, it creates an increased level of tension that all of our communities now have to navigate.
Yeah. And it goes back to profit. It's all about, the expenditures are really investments for them, right? So the U.S. spends $182 billion a year on incarceration. That's an investment by the United States. And they know that they're going to get a return on that investment. That investment goes into prison guards and barbed wire. It also goes into surveillance tech. Anywhere you go, there's a camera watching you, e-monitoring, cash bail, phone call fees, commissary markups, medical care that actually doesn't care and is ineffective, contracts that profit off of suffering. That's the reality of where we're at. And so people are putting their money into these systems knowing that it's big business. It's big business in this country.
Absolutely. People used to think we were joking when we said it's $1 billion industry. And I used to work for Amnesty International leading its mass incarceration work. And one of the things that I find very fascinating, which is why I think building the coalition around mass incarceration reform in the United States is so hard, is that in the 1950s, in the 1940s, and the 1930s, America used to build things. Fun fact, we actually used to build things, right? Before the during the Industrial Revolution, before the Fourth Industrial Revolution, we used to build things. And so a lot of small towns around the country used to be absorbed by these big factories that provided jobs for the local community. Guess what those factories have now been replaced with? Prisons. It's hard to go into those communities and say, we need to reform mass incarceration. We need to, stop the violence, provide justice, and reform mass incarceration in this country. Yeah. But these folks, this is the only jobs that they have for 50, 60, 70 miles in their hometown. And that is, I think, goes to show you just how deliberate and the intentionality is to stop a lot of the reform that is necessary. And you have like progressive mayors, quote unquote, progressive mayors across the country who are building these cop cities. It's like, at the very least, are you going to believe the data that arrest more police does not make our community safe? And it's becoming extremely frustrating. And I think it goes to show the rest of the world that America is not as free and just as it claims to be. Like that wool is now being pulled off the rest of the world's eyes.
Yeah, 1 million. Oh, I love that you got into that. So real, so real. And also, I think the emphasis too, because there's a Nelson Mandela quote of like, you can tell a country's values, I'm paraphrasing, you can tell a country's values by how it treats its children and its most vulnerable, including prison populations. And in America, those are one and the same. Young people are such a large part of this prison industrial complex as well. To bring up, like our past work, we are both on the boards of the Gathering for Justice, an organization founded by Harry Belafonte around juvenile justice and ending child incarceration. He was inspired to start this organization in 2005 when a 5-year-old Black girl named Jaisha Scott was arrested, handcuffed in her classroom for throwing a tantrum. What are we talking about? And so you have this civil rights icon, this movie star, this musical legend who is watching a young Black girl being arrested in her classroom and who is saying, what did the civil rights movement accomplish if this is what's happening to our young people? And so that is what scholars are calling the youth control complex, this web of system that criminalizes Black and brown youth from school to the streets. There's an incredible book called Push Out that talks about this. Which specifically happens to young Black kids who are told you're being too loud in class. That's disorderly conduct. You can be arrested. You defend yourself at school and get into a fight. That's now an assault charge. And so kids are not being treated as kids. The school to prison pipeline has really become this cradle to prison pipeline. And so from birth, young Black children, young brown children are being criminalized and shuffled through these detention centers and primed for their real role, which is to be adults in the system, which is, again, an investment. You invest in it when they're young, and now you know that you have a future prison population the moment they hit the age of being seen as adults.
Oh, the adultification of Black and brown kids are staggering. Like Tamir Rice, right? Like a little boy with a toy gun in a playground being shot within seconds of police arriving on the scene, believing that he was a grown man and he had a real gun. It just goes to show you the lack of training our police officers have, or
how they're being trained. Yeah.
The fact that they don't care, right? They don't care because they know that they can cause harm to Black and brown communities, and there's going to be little to no accountability, or the city's going to write a check with our tax dollars to the victims. I also think what was really important about your statement, is this idea that we have instructed entire ecosystems, right, that filters children up to the school to prison pipeline or school to deportation. And a lot of it is based on if you ever gone into an inner city school. If you've ever gone into an inner city school, and I've been to inner city schools, we've been to inner city schools. If you go to an inner city school and then go to a prison in the United States, they are vastly similar. Bars on the wall, metal detectors at the door, telling students that need to walk in one file line, not talk until spoken to. This is the culture of how we're training and teaching kids to go into a prison. And I know it's going into prisons and it's not into the workforce because no workforce look like that, right? No workplace looks like the way our schools are designed. And there's a really great meme that shows the parallels between everything from the cafeteria to the classroom to the hallways, the metal detectors, how eerily similar they are to our incarcerated systems in this country. And I just want to tell y'all, it's devastating to think about raising children, raising a family in a way which will criminalize them from the moment that they breathe, actually before they breathe their first breath in this.
Yeah, because I have a little black son, a beautiful 1-year-old baby boy, and thinking that there's someone looking at his beautiful face and smile and planning on conditioning him in those ways is really terrifying, because it is conditioning. It's making people comfortable with the surveillance, with the control, with having so little autonomy over your life, so that when you are further entrenched into these systems, it just feels natural, and not abnormal. And like you said, you just described the schools that I went to growing up, especially around a holiday. Like, I remember talking to my wife about the fact that around Halloween, we couldn't bring book bags to school because it would make the lines at the metal detectors longer. And then at the last weeks of school, they had to be clear book bags if you did bring a bag. Like, all of these moments are to say, because when you go and visit someone in jail or prison, they'll tell you what colors you can and can't wear, how low your neckline can or cannot be, what you can or cannot bring in with you. And so it's all control, and the control is tied to the profit, because then when they control what you can bring in, then you have to use their privatized systems. You have to use their telecom giants. You have to use their food vendors. You have to get the clothing that comes from the specific companies that make prison clothing. And so it's why they say the system isn't broken. It's working exactly how it was built to be. The conditioning leads to dependency on the same corporations and companies that fit into the guidelines that work within the system of surveillance and control. And then you don't even think about the fact that, oh, wait, basically you're telling me I have to spend my money with these spaces to have any sort of freedom or connection to my people on the inside, or if you are on the inside, to my people on the outside.
Yeah. And I can tell you there's nothing normal about holding people in bondage. We all know, if you ever read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, we know that slavery didn't end, it transformed to mass incarceration. And we're going to dive more into that with our guest, Bianca, when we come back. But just to remind you, you're watching The Other Side of Change only on the Black Star Network.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. The window to invest in Fanbase is closing. We've raised over $10.6 million of our $17 million goal. That means there's room for less than 6,370 people to invest in Fanbase for the average amount. The minimum to invest in Fanbase right now is $399. That makes you an owner in Fanbase today. Go to startengine.com/fanbase to invest. Why? Because current social apps have taken advantage of users for far too long, with content suppression, shadow banning, harmful racist content, and no real tools for monetization and equity. Fanbase has over 1.4 million users and counting, allowing anyone to reach all their following and monetize their content from day one. Social media is the new TV, and whoever owns the apps that distribute that content have the opportunity to own potential billion-dollar companies. While big platforms with uncertain futures are failing to serve their users, Fanbase is stepping up to fill the gap. Don't wait until it's too late. Invest now, invest for yourself and your future. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and own the next generation of social media.
We are back on The Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network. We are joined today by someone whose work has fundamentally changed how we understand incarceration, and I know it will change how you think about this as well. Bianca Tylek is the founder of Worth Rises and the author of the newly released book, The Prison Industry. It shines a light on the billions made off the backs of incarcerated people. We are so grateful to have her. Bianca, welcome to The Other Side of Change.
Thank you so much. Great to see you both, Tamira and Bree.
No, yes. Thank you. Yeah, we were just talking before we brought you on how timely this book is. And I think as folks are every few years we talk about mass incarceration and little chips away at progress seems to happen, but largely the system doesn't change. Can you tell us, because your book, really breaks down the industry behind incarceration and how it has been, really the encyclopedia talking about corporate greed. Can you walk us through how deep and wide this greed really is and how it infiltrates many of the communities we all live and work in?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So the prison industry is an $80 billion industry, which is a lot of what people really don't understand. People think about the prison industry and they think private prisons, right? And obviously they are very, very a big part of sort of mainstream media right now because of everything that's going on within the federal government. But private prisons are really just like the tip of the iceberg. They're only about 5 billion of that 80 billion. So the $80 billion industry is more about sort of the outsourcing and money that is funneled through incarcerated bodies and incarceration system and detention as well. And so it's everything from healthcare to food and commissary to telecom, and there's a chapter about every single one of these sort of mini sectors within the industry in the book. And then importantly, with each of these, it really does, we delve into the history of how we got to the privatization of these sectors, but also the harms that they're causing to communities. And so as you said, it's like, what is happening to communities because of these particular sectors, the privatization and the corporate greed, and at times government greed that's being sort of levied, is families and people who are incarcerated are truly suffering. Everything from the cost of a simple phone call that leads 1 in 3 families with an incarcerated loved one into debt, to companies that deny people basic and preventative and necessary at times healthcare, to sort of pad their bottom lines by cutting costs and then use bankruptcy courts to wipe their slate clean and do it all over again. You have food companies that really are serving people absolutely grotesque food, and oftentimes pop culture likes to say, well, oh, food in prison is bad notoriously, and that's funny. It's not funny, because more than people who are incarcerated get food illness more than 6 times more than people on the outside, and that has long-term health consequences.
Wow.
Not to mention that they're being fed, rodent feces and body parts and things of that sort. So it's a vast industry that is like deeply impacting people in their health and their emotional state and their financial state and beyond.
Dang. Oh my gosh. I didn't, I think these are the things that are so important to outline, because as you said, they have become almost like pop culture phenomenons. There are jokes that are made about prison food, about not dropping the soap, about all of these sorts of conditions, and we normalize them, but it's real trauma and it has real impacts on people who we want to come back out of society and be able to participate and be citizens again after being treated like worse than the thing at the bottom of the shoe. I want to get into, though, what you said at the top, which is that this is an $80 billion industry and the private prisons are only $5 billion of that. Who is profiting and getting rich off of this? Because it seems obvious that the system is invisible and mysterious by design. There's like this, it's like the Wiz where, it's like the wizard is behind the curtain. And so it's unclear who exactly benefits from the food being so bad, who benefits from the conditions being so deplorable, who gets that $80 billion.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think that the opaqueness of our prison industry is critical to its operation, and it's intentional for the way in which it moves. You have to sort of remember that a common citizen, whether you're a taxpayer, even though you're a taxpayer paying for the system, you can't just walk into a prison, right? Journalists can't just walk into prisons. In many states, not even elected officials can walk into a prison. And so these places are wildly opaque, incredibly, there is just a lack of oversight of any type. And anytime you have sort of financial interests moving into a space like that, where it is just really not seen to the public and cannot be, there's no transparency, there's no checks and balances, you should expect abuse to happen. And that's particularly true when we villainize people the way that we do who are incarcerated and their families, right? So who is it who's profiting off these systems? It is a huge matrix. There are over 4,000 corporations that are engaged in the prison industry. And in those corporations, you have everything from major publicly traded conglomerates like 3M that supply raw materials for prison labor, to mom and pop shops, to local sort of car dealerships. Like, you sort of name it, there's a vast network of these corporate interests. And then they're also like hand in hand with the government. Take telecom again. You have an industry that is $1.5 billion on its own. 90% of that is actually owned by 3 companies, all of which are owned by private equity firms. One of the largest in that field, Platinum Equity, is owned by the owner of the Detroit Pistons. So this starts to like feed into our sort of social fabric, our cultural institutions, our sports, all of that, and shape how we, view what the narratives are that are told about people who are incarcerated because of those who are in power, who are making money off of it. And so it's like, it's vast in that way. But I also have to mention that it is also, sort of a huge part of that $80 billion are the corrections officers and staff that are within those prisons and jails, right? And this has to do with people being shipped from, in many cases, urban cities for jobs in rural America where prisons were built throughout the 80s and 90s and 2000s. And now we are in a situation where even when we see the actual prison population drop and maybe a prison is under threat of close, you have those officers fighting, right, to keep those prisons open. And there's something really, really perverse about saying that we need to put people in cages in order for other people to have jobs. Like, that is not how our economy should be built.
I'm so happy you made it. So we talked about that before in the beginning at the top of the show, and this idea that many of the factories in rural communities were replaced with private prisons or even just state and city run prisons. And to your point, on a larger scale, when we think about like who is benefiting, we, the public, is benefiting. The U.S. labor prison produced an estimated $2 billion in industry output last year. That's fast food restaurants. That's the signs that you need for your cars. Like, there are so many industries that benefit off.
Actually, more than that.
So exactly, right.
$7 billion. $2 billion is just services. $9 billion is like actual products that are made in prisons and jails. And even that is a wild underestimate of what comes out.
No, but so to that point, we are almost participating in the very systems that we know are demonizing our community. So how do we, the public, become more conscious of the things that we buy and participate in, knowing where they come from, but also being okay with recognizing, should we be successful in eliminating private prisons and reducing mass incarceration, that it will hurt our pockets in a way that we have to be okay with if it means creating a more just society?
Yeah, I think that there's actually a number of different interests there. I think that we're actually being short-sighted. Mm-hmm. The version that we're told now, right, and that we know, which is, yes, we are benefiting in all these different ways. And I want to be clear, it's often not us benefiting, but sometimes the corporations, governments in different places, and yes, then the taxpayers sort of down the line. But there are also, we did actually a cost-benefit analysis of ending slavery in prisons. Mm-hmm. It's 2025. We did a cost benefit analysis on ending slavery. I just want to note that. But we did, nevertheless, working with, sort of very high profile, high level economists. And what we found was that actually ending slavery would put $18 billion minimum back into our economy on an annual basis. And so as much as we are getting a lot out of the institution of slavery and incarceration, mass incarceration, we have more to gain from ending it. We just don't talk about it in that way and in the long term because we are so short-sighted about the immediate costs that need to be then remedied. Right. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, this system is in many ways a windfall, right, for the sort of profiteers, the prison profiteers that we're talking about. But the best way for taxpayers, the everyday person, to actually save money is not through the abuse of prison labor. It is through freeing people. This system is still wildly expensive, right? Like, yes, we might get $11 billion of products and services out of prisons and jails, but we're spending $80 billion.
Yeah.
So, or more than that, right? And so at the end of the day, and mind you, that's only prisons and jails. If you add in courts and like
detention centers and halfway houses,
180 billion. It's $185 billion that you're talking about for the entire, sort of mechanism to function. That is a huge drain on taxpayer resources. And so we can't be short-sighted in the limitations of what we get out right now, because the main people winning are not us as taxpayers. And that's beyond, that's from a financial standpoint. That's beyond the long-term impacts, economic impacts on communities, and the social impacts on the ability for different families and communities to move up the economic ladder, as well as just human decency, right? And what happens to people, as well as our safety. Our safety is not served by this system. Right. So much so that private prisons, which are in most cases the only prison-only businesses that are publicly traded, in their own annual reports that they have to file for shareholders, they actually mention a reduction in crime as a risk to their business. So if you think that this system is designed to keep you safe, you are very strongly mistaken.
That's just evil.
Yeah.
Evil.
Yeah, 1 million per. And I want to get deeper into that point of we are not being served by these industries and these corporations. And you talked about the actual just human impacts. There's so many numbers that we're throwing around that are important to understanding the business and the investments and the, all of that behind this. But even your point about the food illnesses and that being at a greater rate inside of these sorts of facilities. Or we were kind of leaning into earlier this idea that, when parents go into prison, the whole family suffers. Yeah. And that what are the other ways that real people and families are impacted by this privatization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these families are impacted in a number of ways, right? So people who are incarcerated are denied wages and then charged exorbitant fees and rates for often substandard sort of services and products, right? So people on average in prison are earning about 14 cents an hour. In about 7 or 8 states, people earn nothing at all on majority of jobs. And so that's important because a lot of people, when we talk about wages in prison, think, oh, well, it's the denial of wages to the person who's incarcerated, who is supposed to, quote unquote, pay their debt to society. I always say, who are you actually stealing wages from? Many of these people who are incarcerated were the primary breadwinners for their families before they went inside. You are stealing wages from their children for who they cannot pay child support, or provide other types of family support, right, from their spouses and things of that sort. People come out of prison with tens of thousands of dollars in child support despite having worked full-time jobs. You are denying victims restitution. Imagine trying to pay $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in restitution on 9 cents an hour. In that case, who is the person actually paying their debt to for the harm? Is it society? Are we the ones owed, or is it the victim that's owed? In which case, why not actually give them a pathway to provide that debt or to pay that debt back to that person? Right. And then beyond that, you get not just the loss of revenue for families and victims and others, but you also get the new expense lines. Right. So being in prison is not free, contrary to, again, pop culture. It's some free ride, free healthcare, free, housing, all these things. Being in prison is incredibly expensive, especially when you have absolutely no income in many cases, or, you get a check for $20 every 2 weeks. With phone calls that can, up until recently, were as much as $25 for a simple 15-minute call, thanks to some new regulations and new legislation that has come down, but can still be 10 cents, 12 cents a minute. You can still pay more per minute for phone call than you earn per hour in prison. And so where does that burden then fall? It can't be on the person who's incarcerated because there's truly no way for them to actually pay for that. It falls on families, right? And so now families who are already disproportionately low income, have lost a income line, are having these extra costs. It's the cost of a phone call. It's the cost of visits. It's the cost of medical copays, which big surprise to people. Yes, people in prison actually pay medical copays. It's the cost of commissary items, which I also want to say for Black and brown people, items in commissary for hair products and skin products and things like that are actually astronomically expensive compared to those for others and those on the outside. It is tampons for women. It is all of those things, hygiene products, food. Yeah. It is an extensive array of things that families are now on the hook for.
It's almost like a redistribution of wealth in plain sight, right? Like you're taking money from those who are the most vulnerable in society, redistributing to institutions that are inherently set up to fail. And the idea that these systems were never designed to work in anyone's favor, but the favor of those who are investing behind the scenes in the government. And even to some extent, the government is not technically like pocketing money. They're almost wasting taxpayers' money that could be going to our schools, could be going to our neighborhoods, that would make our communities safer. You know, Bianca, you've been in this work for a very, very long time. Very long time, right? When we first met at that secret society meeting so long ago, that fake Illuminati meeting. Oh man. You then. But, you know, you've been in this space for so long, and I am curious for you as someone who, meets with members of the community and legislators all the time who feel like this work can feel very overwhelming. How do we start kind of taking slow bites of the elephant that in a time in which it feels like Donald Trump is only leaning in, or the administration is only leaning into beefing up our prisons and incarceration system?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a really great point, Jamera, because we don't want to leave people with a hopelessness, right? I think there is a reality that this stuff can get really dark and really, awful. I mean, people are making money off the death penalty. Like, it can get really, really dark quickly. But there are opportunities and there are things changing and there are fights that are winning. And I think it is important to recognize that. For years, for example, in the prison telecom space, we have been levying legislation, regulation, pushing for all these things. And these things are coming to their head. They're actually winning in many, many cases. And, you say take small bites of the apple. I think sometimes we can take major bites of the apple and expect to win too.
No, I said elephant. The apple is edible. The elephant is huge.
There you go. Yes. And so we passed, for example, the first piece of legislation in the country to make communication in a prisoner jail entirely free. And we're like, we don't want it cheaper. We don't want just make it free. It is 2025. I live in the city of New York, and in the city of New York, on every single New York City block, there is a kiosk where you can make a phone call anywhere in the country for free. If we can do that for the city of New York and 8 million people, we can do that in our prisons and jails. And so we started to levy that fight. And to date, we've been able to pass similar legislation in many cities and counties, states, and even the federal system, making it such that over 300,000 incarcerated people today have fully free access to phone calls. And of course, their families. We have generated over 2.5 billion additional call minutes and saved families over $500 million. And so we are making those massive strides, and the industry is upset. They're fighting really hard in courts and all these different things, and they haven't yet been able to score their win, so much so that one of these companies is probably weeks away from filing for bankruptcy. And so it is absolutely possible. And I think in terms of what, the average sort of person can do, there's a number of things, right? You can do everything from, if you have the time, get involved in one of your local campaigns to make communication free in prison. You can reach out to your legislator to tell them to end the exception in the 13th Amendment that still allows for slavery in our country, so long as you have been convicted of a crime. And you can do that at endtheexception.com. You can follow our work, read the book, just make sure to educate yourself and then educate others around you. You can go to data.worthrises.org, which is where we have that entire database of over 4,000 corporations that are engaged in the prison industry, and have a sort of consciousness about what businesses you engage with, whether through your day-to-day life or through your investment portfolio or through the endowment of the university that you're with, or your pension, if you're working, all of those things. So, there are many steps that I think can be taken that absolutely do make a huge difference.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
That's so good to hear you say, because I know that people, feel swamped and feel like there's so many issue areas that they care deeply about. And because these corporations feel so big, like I don't have billions of dollars to go up against them. I don't have the sort of power and influence that they have, but we do have power and influence in different ways. And it's important that we leverage it and never feel as though we are helpless in this. And we have to step up, especially for those of us who are not being swallowed by those systems, because those on the inside have even less power and influence to speak out against them. So I really appreciate that. Before we let you go, tell us what you want people to take away from the book, how people can support, where they can buy, where they might be able to find you for in-person book events, all of that.
Yes, absolutely. So obviously, please buy the book. It is available in basically every online retailer, major retailer where you might buy books, as well as many local bookstores. So make sure to patronize your local bookstores. If they don't have it, feel free to ask for it. It's a great way to get it in. And then also if you visit us at worthrises.org/the prison industry, you can find the events calendar, book talks that we're having. We just finished some in Philly, New York, and are moving to other cities around the country. And so we hope to see you at one.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bianca.
Thank you.
We appreciate you deep. Thank you for doing this work, making it so easy for us to know and be informed and take action. And good luck on the book tour.
Thank you. Take care, y'all.
Bye.
So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. You're watching On the Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network.
What's up, y'all? Look, Fanbase is more than a platform. It's a movement to empower creators, offering a unique opportunity for everyday people to invest in Black-owned tech, infrastructure, and help shape the future of social media. Investing in technology is essential for creating long-term wealth and influence in the digital age. The Black community must not only consume tech, we must own it.
Discover how equity crowdfunding can serve as a powerful tool for funding Black businesses, allowing entrepreneurs to raise capital directly through their community through the Jobs Act.
You're watching The Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network. Before break, we had a lovely conversation with Bianca, and her work reminds us that mass incarceration isn't just racist, it is profitable. And that's why reform alone isn't enough. We have to disrupt the industry at every level.
Yes. And we're going to leave you with some resources. You absolutely must grab a copy of Bianca's book, The Prison Industry by Bianca Tylek. Also support her organization, Worth Rises. They are really on the front lines of this. And to get grounded with some of the OGs in this space, obviously you need to have read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander and Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis.
So many good books. I have them on my bookshelf. And remember that freedom isn't a trickle-down power. It is a rise up from the people power. And until next time, continue to watch and continue to do the work only on The Other Side of Change on the Black Star Network.
Bye.